Phil Cooke, it's great to be with you. So, what was your childhood like? Where did you grow up?
It was terrific. I grew up in Charlotte, North Carolina. Dad was a pastor of a church of about 150, 200 people. We lived at the parsonage next door, which had been a one-room schoolhouse, and they'd expanded it a little bit. And I literally slept upstairs under the attic fan. And we would, in the summer, we would slide open the door, and if I'd have sat up in bed, my head would have been cut off because it was a gigantic fan blowing up there. And I think I learned a lot of people skills because I got to see all kinds of people, and it was an amazing experience. It was an amazing experience.
So, where did you go to school? Where did you go to university?
Graduated from high school in Charlotte, then went to Oral Roberts University in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I had a track scholarship to University of North Carolina State, but I really felt God leading me to come to ORU. And that was at a time when Oral Roberts was producing primetime television specials on NBC. And as a student, I got on the crew as a freshman. I had a friend next door to my in the dorm who worked on the crew, and he got me on. And I started by moving sets around. Then I graduated to setting lights, and then I started running camera. And all that time, I was working with professionals from Hollywood. Even though we were in Tulsa, they would fly out, produce these programs. And so I have to say, from day one, I started getting an amazing education in how to produce television programs. So it was really quite remarkable.
At that time, did you feel like media was a calling for you as a ministry?
You know, even going further back in high school, I had a group of friends that we just enjoyed making movies. We took my dad's Super 8 movie camera. You remember those 3-minute reels of film. And we made army movies and superhero movies and mafia movies, all kind of things. Never crossed our mind you could do this for a living. And we made these movies. I took them to college thinking, well, maybe I'll find somebody that, wants to help make movies with me. So the day I'm unpacking in my dorm, my freshman year, a couple of my films roll out of my suitcase, and a guy across the hall said, "Hey, I'm taking a film class. I can show you how to edit your film." I didn't even know you could edit. I didn't know. That's how ignorant I was. Went down to the film department that very night, started working on my movie, and late into the evening, the professor walked by. He'd been working on a project of his own, and he introduced himself, and he said, "I've been watching your little movie out of the corner of my eye." And he said, "I have students that have been taking my classes for years and don't do this well. Would you mind if I showed your film in my class tomorrow?" And I said, "Well, sure, if I can sit on the back row, I'd like to see what they think." So the next day I came in the class, threaded the projector, sat on the back row, showed my little movie, and it was nothing to scream about, trust me. But at the end, they talked about it. The class discussed it. And this thought hit me, this crystal clear moment of revelation that I've never had before or since, that if I can do something with a camera that makes people talk like this is what I'm supposed to do with my life. And I was a music major at that point, so I literally changed my major that day from music to film and television, and I've never looked back.
And how did you meet your wife?
Kathleen grew up in Vegas, Las Vegas, Sin City, and her dad was the basketball coach at Las Vegas High School, still has the record for most state championships, and she was a year younger than me, so my sophomore year in college, I sat next to her at complete random, at a Vesper service. We call it a Vesper service in those days. It was a Sunday night worship service on campus. And I sat next to her, and this is 1973. She was wearing a hot pink corduroy pantsuit with white platform, patent leather shoes. I thought she was the most amazing thing I'd ever seen. Took me 3 months to get the courage to ask her out. And when I did, this is before iPhones, she thought I was another Phil. So she said yes. Thinking I was somebody else. So you have no idea what it's like to show up at the dorm to pick up your date, and the expression on her face was, "Oh no, it's not, it's this Phil." And so we didn't start off well, but it didn't take me long before I finally won her over, and we eventually got married.
So in the early years of your marriage, what was your career path? What was it
It was
like?
great. She was an elementary school teacher. She majored in elementary education, and so she was an elementary school teacher. I was in film from day one. And started helping Oral. I came to LA for a year to seek my fame and fortune. And in those days, the unions had a lock on everything. It was really hard to advance because there wasn't much independent production. So they asked me to come back to Tulsa and help produce Oral shows. I ended up directing them. And then years later, we decided to really finally answer God's call and move to the West Coast. So we moved to California. I really had felt for a long time that's where God wanted us to go. And so we finally moved to California, and everything took off. It's been quite an interesting ride.
What year was that, and what were the early days like?
1991. We moved in 1991 to California, and it's very difficult, but God opened doors for us. We stopped in Las Vegas to stay with her parents we had 2 young daughters. We stayed for a month with her parents in Vegas while Kathy and I would fly over to LA and look for a house. And while I was there, I got a job working for a couple of the casinos. Who knew? They needed a writer, an advertising writer, to write their ad copy, and it was really interesting. And I ended up they have the world's largest amusement park for kids behind the Circus Hotel called the Astrodome. No, it's called it was Astrodome, Wonderdome, whatever. And they said, Phil, you've got to go name the rides. And I had no idea about naming rides. So I went to my daughter's first grade class, and I asked the teacher, can I have the kids for an hour? And she said, sure, come on in. So I went in, got the kids all around me. I said, okay, guys, we got to name some rides. And I said, okay, we've got a roller coaster that goes through the mountains and the desert. Some kid yelled out, Canyon Blaster. Great, check. Said I got another ride that bounces you around and flips you upside down. Some kid yelled, Road Runner. Check. I literally went down the whole list of rides, and my daughter's first grade class named them all. The next day I went and pitched the name, not a single change, pitched it to the leadership at the casino and the hotel, and they accepted them, and they're still called that today. It's like 35 years later. So I never told them my daughter's first grade class named the rides, but that's the way it worked.
They say Hollywood is one of the toughest places to make it, so what was it like for you in the early days, and how do you feel like God was helping you?
Oh, there's no question that God's opened doors like crazy. And the way I view Hollywood is so many Christians look at Hollywood as the enemy, and I understand. But the fact is, I don't believe Hollywood is anti-Christian. They're just people that for the most part have never grown up in church. They've never grown up in a Christian family. They don't get it. They don't even understand what we're all about. And so what I encourage people to do, instead of criticizing Hollywood, let's pray for Hollywood. What if we treated it like a mission field? We wouldn't go to a third world country, surround a tribe, hold up signs and protest and criticize them. And if we don't do, what do? We become their friend. We develop a relationship. We share Christ with them. What if we did that in Hollywood? What if we prayed for a generation of young people who are writers and artists and actors and directors and producers? What if we infiltrated Hollywood from the inside? So I'm a big believer that if we look at Hollywood as a mission field and start praying for Hollywood, as difficult as that sounds to some people, I just think that's going to be the way God could change the whole industry.
Do you have some examples at the beginning of your time?
Oh, yeah.
Of how God opened doors?
Absolutely. I did have one situation doing a music video, a big music video with a major record label, and I was going to direct, they'd asked me to direct this, and I had to meet with the head of video for this record label. And you walked in his office and there was a slight smell of pot in the air, somebody had been smoking marijuana, and there were beer cans lined up on his desk. This is a high-level executive in a major record company. And he just immediately started letting out profanity, saying, I don't want you here. I'm not interested in you being here. I don't want you to work on this project, but the celebrity wants you here. The studio wants you here. So I've got to deal with it. And so we had to shoot in New York. And I'll never forget the day we shot with a crew, all Christian guys. I have a really high level of Christian artists that work for me on the crew. And the day we started shooting the music video, he showed up, and he showed up with his team. And I knew, oh boy, I'm going to be in real trouble. And he said, you screw up, this is going to be the last video you ever direct. And so we started filming. And we're about 45 minutes into the filming, and he jumped up out of his seat and said, stop it right now. Cooke, I want to see you. He took me out in the hallway, and I thought, okay, my career's over, I'm done. And I told everybody to take a break. He took me in the hallway. He said, I don't understand this. When I go into a music video in the industry, everybody's yelling at each other. They're arguing with each other. He said, your team works together. They care about each other. They're trying to make something amazing. I don't understand that. What's going on here? And it was really, how do you answer that? And he stopped for a minute and he kind of teared up and he said, watching you work, it reminds me of why I got in this business in the first place. And he kind of got to the point where he couldn't stay. He teared up, walked out of the room, and I never saw him again. And when I came back a month later to play the edited version of the music video for him, he got up and walked around his desk, hugged me. His staff was shocked. They'd never seen him do anything like that. So I've learned that if you don't have to make a big deal about being a Christian. You don't have to broadcast it. You don't have to talk to people about it. As long as you live the life God's called you to live, people will notice. I have a friend, I don't mean to ramble, but I have a friend who's a director of cop shows. He directs episodic dramas for the network. And he said, I've got 60 people on my crew every day shooting these cop shows. He said, I never talk about being a Christian. I never make a big deal. But he said, every time somebody in my crew goes through a divorce or alcoholism or some other problem at home, they always find their way to me. And I think that's God, and that's how God works. And so my word to people is, you don't have to hand people tracts. You don't have to talk about being Christian. You don't have to have a fish on your business card. Just live the life God's called you to live and be that person, and I think people will be attracted.
We're speaking at the National Religious Broadcasters Convention, which is basically Christians working in media. Back in the early 90s when you first came to Hollywood, what kind of Christian influence did you see with others? Were we doing a good job?
No, not at all. Not at all. When we first came out, and it was a battle because, like I say, Hollywood, they didn't get the Christian thing. They didn't understand Christians. They didn't understand what the deal was. And so now we're seeing a resurgence of young filmmakers like The Chosen. They're doing some amazing things. But for a long time, it was not that way at all. And we had to convince studios, we had to convince producers that there was an audience of people who take their faith seriously. And I think really Mel Gibson's film, The Passion of the Christ, was what broke through. That was what, we call it passion dollars. That movie made so much money, it finally got Hollywood's attention, and they finally recognized, there are a lot of people that take their faith seriously out there. And so once that happened, doors started to open even more. So it was a slog. It was a difficult battle at first, trying to convince the studios. I remember when Passion of the Christ did really, really well, and suddenly faith-based movies were a big deal. I remember some of the big name producers in Hollywood sent their people over to my office and said, we want to know what a faith-based movie is. Can you tell us? And they gave me scripts and said, read these scripts and tell me if they're faith-based. Of course they weren't, not even close. But Hollywood just didn't know. And so it's been an educational process that's taken years. And I think we're finally getting to a place where we're seeing major studios, streamers like Amazon and Netflix, they're being open to Christian faith-based projects. So it's a very interesting world.
Jim Caviezel, who played Jesus in The Passion, he was told taking on that role would be career suicide.
Yes.
But what impact did it have that he took that risk?
Oh, it's been fantastic for him. He got a network television show out of it. He's done tons of movies since. There's still a lot of, I don't know if prejudice is the right word. We did our company did a TV commercial for Focus on the Family last summer, and it was a super amazing commercial. It was, it kind of poked fun at people that, if they want a child, they call it a baby. If they don't want it, they call it a fetus. And we kind of made fun of that. And but when we wrote the script, it was a terrific script. We gave it to casting directors to audition actors for the roles. And casting directors all over the country said, we're not going to send this out. If we send this script out, we'll never work in this business again. And finally, we found one casting director in Dallas who said, I'll send it out for you. She sent it out. We had 300 actors auditioning for 5 roles. So we see today it's the gatekeepers that are the real problem. There's an audience out there that wants to see television, film, commercials, all kind of things that respect people's faith. But it's very often the gatekeepers we have to do battle with.
Since the early 90s, you came to Hollywood. What have been some of the standout projects for you that have particularly had a spiritual impact?
Well, Billy Graham came to us 20 years ago and said, I want to do a 1-hour TV special that somebody who'd never in a million years watch a Billy Graham program would watch. So we took him at his word. We made it was really kind of like Billy Graham meets MTV. And we intertwined music with his message and interviews, and it was just, they had never seen it before. It kind of freaked them out. and they didn't want to air it. His executive team was just nervous about it. They didn't want to air it. And finally, somebody talked him into it. They ended up broadcasting it globally, and it ended up being the most successful program they'd ever done in their whole history. And this is a program where we had a guy commit suicide, open the movie with a guy committing suicide. So we knew it was a radical departure for any Billy Graham program, but we also wanted to engage the culture in a different way than they'd done it before. And it ended up being super successful. And we were very proud of that. We've done Super Bowl commercials over the years. We've done the Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C. as a client. We've done some amazing work for them. I always tell people the Museum of the Bible is so amazing. It's the kind of place you could take a non-believing friend to and not be embarrassed at all, because it's just incredible. And so we love working with Christians that have a vision, that really want to accomplish something at a high level, make a big impact. This Focus on the Family TV commercial was a great example. And so, we love doing challenging visionary projects.
How much does it help when a high-profile, maybe Hollywood actor, producer, steps up about their faith?
Oh, it makes a huge difference. Suddenly we're not so weird anymore. Now, let me say this, Peter. It's funny that Hollywood is not, Christianity is not so different in Hollywood. I mean, there are people in Hollywood that worship rocks and hug trees. So being a Christian is not that weird. So, as long as you engage people in the right way, but there's no question that when a celebrity, when a high-level producer, when someone with credibility steps up, Mark Wahlberg is really famous for saying positive things about his faith. When people like that step up, people notice, and they suddenly realize, wait a minute, this may be not so strange after all. Maybe I should investigate this, particularly when they see how successful somebody like Mark Wahlberg is. So it does make a difference when influencers will speak out.
Something you're well known for, I think it was a book you wrote, but you speak about faith branding.
Yes.
And some Christians might be uncomfortable putting the words faith and branding together. Tell us about that.
Sure. Well, I wrote the book Branding Faith back in 2006, I think. Updated it in 2011 to a book called Unique, Telling Your Story in the Age of Brands and Social Media. And it really, the fact is, branding is just how people perceive you. What do people think of you? What do people think of your church? Well, I should really say, what do people think of when they think of your church or your ministry or you? Everybody has a brand. You have a brand. I have a brand. We have a perception that people think of. So as Christians, I think we need to think about that more. People are never going to darken the door of your church if they think the pastor is a no-talent hack and all he wants is money and nobody cares about anybody there. So you have to have a favorable perception nowadays. I saw a study recently that people see about 10,000 media messages every single day. We're being overwhelmed with information these days. Our iPhones don't help. We touch our phone about 2,000 times a day, literally. And so in that kind of world, we have to start with at least a positive perception. We want people to think, you know what, maybe I could go check that out. Maybe that's worth listening to. So I've just really called churches, ministry organizations, nonprofits to be aware of the way they're perceived in the culture. Think about that first thought. We do know that people will give you just a few seconds today to decide. I saw one study, the Wall Street Journal published a study recently that when you meet someone for the first time, you decide what you think of that person in the first 4 to 8 seconds. I mean, after all, you got text messages to answer, you've got email to answer, you've got phone calls to answer, you've got other things to do. So we've changed our behavior literally so that we make decisions before we even know what those things are. So I apply that to church, I apply it to experiences, whether it's a conference or an event or a ministry outreach. We have to try to work in those first few seconds to give a positive perception so people will at least be open to opening your book or to checking out your church or whatever it is you want them to do.
One of the hot topics we're hearing a lot about here at the NRB convention is AI, how that's going to impact how we share the Christian message. What are your thoughts?
AI is not going to go away. And I'm a big believer that we should explore it. And I've been experimenting it for the last year. And the truth is, AI has been around for a long time. When you use your GPS on your phone to get directions someplace, That's AI making decisions about, well, you could go a lot of different routes. Let me show you the best one that might be the best route for you to take. So we've been surrounded by AI a lot longer than we think. The problem is right now in America, a lot of companies are suing AI, and a lot of writers are suing, a lot of newspapers are suing, because AI learns by really pulling stuff off the internet. And they're scraping, what we call scraping the internet. They're pulling stories and ideas. And so there's a lot of plagiarism going on out there, because they're just not making stuff up out of the blue. They're finding stuff out there and they're putting it all together. So I encourage pastors to experiment with it for research. I do for my blog that I write and some of my books, but I always am very careful to rewrite it, update it, making sure it's not the computer talking, it's Phil that's talking. In fact, I did write just as an experiment last month, I wrote a book with AI. I had AI write an entire book, 50,000 word book. It took me about 2 hours, wrote the whole, I gave it the theme, I gave it what I wanted each chapter to be about. It wrote the whole book. Then I ran it through a plagiarism checker. And to my surprise, there was about 40 cases of where it had just plagiarized other magazine articles, books, newspaper articles. It just plagiarized stuff and pulled it to make my book. So we have to be really careful. Right now, we're in the very early stages of AI, and I think the thing that makes us the most worried is probably the video or photo capability of AI, because it can change your face into somebody else. It could put your head on somebody else's body. There's just a lot of questionable things out there, so we have to be aware, but we should be involved.
As well as utilizing this technology, but with caution, what else can us as a Christian community do to really impact the world through media? What else do we need to do?
Become patrons. Everybody listening to this right now is probably going to a church with a young filmmaker who dreams of going to Hollywood, or dreams of making television programs or movies or short films or social media content. What if we help them? What if we help pay for their college? What if we help plug them into the right school? You could become a patron in a lot of ways. There's so many filmmakers and creative Christians out there that are trying to write books, trying to make movies, trying to engage the culture. I'll tell you, we could all help if we just step up and guide them, help them with mentorship, help them get plugged into a college where they could learn. There's so many things we could do that would make a dramatic difference in their life. Don't make them, I had to beat my head against a wall because there was nobody to help me in the early days. But I see now there's so many resources and so many Christians that have the finances that could step up and maybe really help a filmmaker, a writer, an artist achieve their dream. And I think that's so important.
Just finally, Phil, you're a very busy man. What projects can we look out for? What are you excited about at the moment?
I've got a book coming out this summer actually, a little bit different from me. Most people don't realize that because I'm known as the media guy, for years, 25 years, I get called into situations where there's a crisis in a church. Maybe the pastor runs off with a secretary, or a youth leader has an inappropriate relationship with a kid in the youth group, or somebody embezzles money. And churches are blindsided. They don't know what to do. Do we need an attorney? How do we tell the congregation? Do we talk to reporters? Do we release a statement? And some of these are high profile problems. And so I've guided so many churches through these dangerous, dangerous waters. And I saw a survey by the Barna Group recently that 27% of people that leave the church do it because of a crisis like that. They do it because they saw a pastor abuse somebody, or a staff member abuse somebody, or take advantage of someone. And I'm thinking, we've got to fix this problem because it's very big. And so I finally poured all that into a book, all those 25 years of working with churches and ministry organizations into a book. It's really going to be a guidebook to help churches prepare. How do we avoid a crisis to begin with? If one happens, how do we navigate through this? And then how do we emerge on the other side? Because my greatest purpose is I don't want to see the church crash and burn because of some stupid decision by an employee or a staff member. A church here in the U.S. in the South recently, a church secretary embezzled $250,000, $250,000. She paid for 2 college degrees for her kids, a couple cars, a house, and she did it over about a 7-year period, and there was no checks, no balances, nobody noticed until a check bounced. And somebody started asking questions. And of course, she's never going to be able to pay it back. and the church had to close. And I'm thinking, how tragic is that a church would have to close because of some stupid action on her part. And so I really, my passion is to help churches survive, and I also want to change our perception in the culture because, like I say, so many people leave the church because of seeing something like that. So I'm really excited about that coming out, and I think that that's going to be an important book.
What's it called?
It's called Church on Trial: How to Save how to protect your congregation and save your reputation in the case of a crisis. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Excellent. Phil Cooke, thank you so much for
My
speaking
pleasure,
to us.
Peter. Thank you.